but I think this is very close, as I was chatting with one of the gentlemen about the interface between this and the autonomic and various other forms, organic computing and other terms that are used for the back-end data side. I think this is really the user interface delivery of those kinds of ideas, right? So if I can anticipate data center operations issues, disk drives full, disk drive failures and rollovers, and other kinds of networking issues in data center operations, this is the application of those same kind of ideas to the end user community, and eventually they're going to come together, right? So that the systems management stuff and the switching of databases and sources and all those kinds of things will happen. And I'll show you a picture a little later of some other thinking in that. This is a simple query. I'm trying to bug Autonomy to give me a better example. Because I think this is not showing them in their best light, but basically I'm showing a very small code fragment that picks up and parses various pieces of a website and presents that. They have a feature called active knowledge that if I'm reading a web page, a Word document, or whatever, it will analyze that in real time and present me with information that's relevant to that. So you can see that there's various at 87, 80% relevancy of these articles to the one that I'm reading. Right? One of the questions that came up today at Forrester in an inquiry, and I was working with Laura Rasmus, our search and portal analyst on this, was people are buying Google. I don't know if we have anybody here from Google tonight. People are buying Google and wondering why it's not working in enterprise like it's working on the internet. Right? Because everybody, right now, the feedback we're getting is everybody wants a Google-like search engine with those kinds of results inside the enterprise. And our analysis is that it's because of the massive information that's available on the internet and the organization of that information and the cross-referencing of that information, because as Google looks at the references between sites and how often they're cited is one of the ways that it elevates information. We don't do as much of that on intranets as people do on the internet. And so we don't see people using intranets in the same way. It's a different phenomenon inside than it is on the internet. And so the search engine that's built around the social phenomenon that exists and the massive information that exists on the internet, and the kind of social piece of people taking their own initiative to do that, they don't have that same kind of motivation inside of corporations. Some of them may, but we don't find that as a universal way. Intranets are much less organized, or too organized to the point you don't even need a search engine because they've categorized everything and you can find what is there, but the rest of the stuff is not as well organized, and therefore those kinds of search engines don't work. This is the kind of stuff that we think we'll start getting around that, because you're now looking at pattern recognition, looking at a massive stuff, finding similar documents based on a plethora of algorithms, from Bayes to various state machines and neural networks and other things that are being used. We've also identified probably in the area of 20 to 25 different algorithms that various researchers have turned into technology that they've now commercialized. Some of it's very similar. Most of them use some form of Bayes that are doing some of this analysis, and then there's various differences in their approaches and various algorithms they've layered on top of that to try to make the accuracy better. But as we've read the academic research, we found that most of the researchers converge on the fact that none of these algorithms is that much better than the other one. And so what we're finding in the marketplace is that this is very much an emerging market, right? We don't have any vendor who has enough mass of technology, enough mass of market share that they can really dominate. So we're seeing companies look at this stuff and saying, gee, I want to take advantage of that. And doing so by doing their own analysis of what works best for them, and also things based on, does it talk to my repositories, does it interface with my portal, and those kinds of other business decisions that they have to make. Because eventually we do think this is going to become, as I said earlier, a middleware layer. Huge interest in this stuff in the U.S. government. I just did a piece on In-Q-Tel picking up and extending the tacit. They were an investor. I don't know if most of you probably know In-Q-Tel is the investment arm of the CIA, and they just extended their contract with Tacit Knowledge Systems to make the tacit competency discovery engine available to multiple agencies. Autonomy was acquired very early on, prior to the formation of the Homeland Security Office by the Coast Guard, and it was then brought in through that realm.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
When you're talking about getting the data from the data sources,
Yeah.
For example, take Oracle database, which has some data inside it, and then if you use one of these search engines, they have their own neural networks or whatever the algorithm, right?
Yep.
When you generated the query from there and then fire the query to the SQL server, Oracle server or whatever. I was wondering, because when you query the Oracle database, that query is being done by the Oracle server, right? So they have their own algorithms, right?
Right.
How this algorithm is going to get superimposed on the whatever data stores algorithm?
They index, primarily this is stuff in binary large objects that they're indexing. They're sending a query prior to, so they're doing record identification. So they're going in, if you're saying that this is an Oracle database dedicated to some kind of content. So the Oracle stuff is primarily metadata, and then there's a blob and or a pointer to a file. They analyze that stuff ahead of time and then take the record return so that when you're doing this matching, they're actually going directly to a record that says our previous analysis of this data is taking you to that record.
So is it fair to say in a crude manner, I take all the existing data warehouse kind of thing,
yeah,
and then this Stratify or whatever is and it's going to somehow some sort of a wrapper API that can query the data warehouse. And
right. I mean, they essentially do both, right? They create and manage the metadata. One of the arguments in the industry is, do I touch the real data, right? Do I put metadata on the real data, or do I put it in a metadata catalog? And one of the other argument is, do I worry about metadata at all, right? And we'll see an example of some metadata issues in a moment. But the question is, if I'm doing taxonomy, conceptual generation, metadata discovery, and then putting that onto the content, I have some very real issues about the interpretation of that metadata. Is that universally accepted? Is somebody looking for something and querying the metadata itself going to use those same terms and be able to identify it via the metadata that I have? Versus the approach with pattern recognition, which is I'm looking at this document and the entire scope of the document, and I'm creating a pattern out of that, and now I'm going and finding content that looks like that, but I haven't explicitly named it. Whenever we start naming things, we start getting into debates. We were talking the other day about the differences between ontologies and taxonomies, and then I said, well, we have to talk about epistemology then. So we start dealing with kind of belief systems, and those are very difficult discussions to have within enterprises. You had a question there?
I just wanted to ask the gentleman to speak a little more clearly.
So let me explain this diagram before I go on. This was AskMe Corporation put together based on QuickPlace, which is now the Lotus Team Environment or Team Workplace, I think it's called. They've rebranded them just in the last few weeks here. But what they do is you are given a task assignment, and it describes what somebody is asking you to do in the QuickPlace. They then go out and send that entire description of a task to the AskMe engine, which then matches that up with people who are capable of helping you achieve that goal. And that then is put back into the QuickPlace so that you can see associated with, here's this assignment, by the way, here's a list of names of people who might be able to help you do that. And this is a code fragment that shows how they go about doing that. So it actually analyzes, let's see if we can make this happen here. Let's see. So it actually analyzes this task information and then gives you the results back of questions and answers that are in their database as well as people related to that. The reason I'm showing code fragments here is because when I gave this presentation at GigaWorld, in the conversation with the CIOs, what I wanted to talk about was very much that the user interface piece, the integration of this technology, is not that difficult. Right? So we are now at the point that these APIs are fairly easy to integrate with various kinds of existing technology. Right? There are no standards yet, so I can't plug and play them against different implementations, but I don't have a real difficult time, because that's one of the issues that IT managers want to know. Right? Do I have a huge investment to make in just getting this stuff to work and integrate it with the solution, or can I worry about the business side of it more and getting the right kind of data to people and putting it in the right place, and not so much about the IT? And I think we're at the point now that they don't have to worry as much about the IT piece of integrating some of these solutions, and they can deal much more with the business side. As I said, I'm using Microsoft Office 2003, and they have an interesting feature that they are now doing pattern recognition inside of Office 2003. They will read a Word document and relate that to, this is now RTC, as we probably know. This is now, it's now an Office product, so this is something like Office RTC. They've rebranded their real-time communications and collaboration server as an Office product, and this shows the kind of integration that they have. They pick up material contributors. So if you can imagine opening a Microsoft Word document, it's a list of names. We've all seen that, you know. But that list of names that we're managing, if we try to pre-populate our instant messaging list with those names, we would end up with an unmanageable mess, because we just have this huge list of potentially thousands of names. What they do is they look for material contributors, and they identify that as somebody who's a co-author, somebody who commented on something, or somebody who went in and modified a document. Right? So they pick up material contributors, and they create this list of members. These are members of that document's group of collaborators. Right? It is in addition to your trusted list of names. These are the people who worked on this document. If I close this document and I open a new document, I'm going to get another member list based on the content that I'm using. Yes?
All that stuff travel every time the document's saved?
No, it's actually done in real time by Word, analyzing the document when you open it.
So it's coming from somewhere else?
No, the code is actually in Office. So they have done feature extraction, and there are smart tags inside of a document that identify names, and those are stored as data inside the Word document. But the material contributor is it's a special kind of smart tag that identifies that. So it's actually reading through the smart tags in a document when it opens it. Now, what happens though is it will shift. So if I'm a new person and I do this, it will then, and I do a comment or modify a piece of the document for the first time, it'll then change me from just doing feature extraction of I'm a person to I'm a material contributor now. Right? So the next person who opens it will then get my information.
What happens when you ship that document out as a contract? Do all those names go out too?
Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, it depends. I mean, you can scrub it.
I hope
right?
so.
If you send it out in a different form. You know, that's the same issue you have now. I mean, smart tags are in the current version of Office.
Right.
All of the comments, you know, from the collaboration standpoint, all of the comments, version control, and everything else. You know, what you want to do is accept all of the changes and then turn smart tagging off and other things that may scrub that document and/or save it in a different format. Right? These do not translate if you print it to PDF.
Okay.
So if you're doing contracts via PDF and you print it out that way, it's not an issue. But now, on the other hand, if you're talking about contracts, this is one of the big issues and big opportunity areas for business-to-business collaboration. I may want, right? I was working at a pharmaceutical company last week in New York that wanted this stuff to be left in because they were going to extend their real-time collaboration environment to include their partners, right? They were going to open up their firewall, invite their partners in, and when they gave them a contract, it was not a contract done, it was a collaborative document, right? So they wanted to be able to have them see these material contributors as well, right? So it's all about the intent of the document when you
See, the thing that's striking me is that there are a tremendous number of shortcuts that people take in the course of doing business.
Yeah.
And this has a way of just